I want to turn to Mark Regev, the spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Mark, good to see you as always. The U.S. State Department has called the beating of this American teenager, Tarek Kader, troubling. One senior State Department official tells CNN that, quote, they are investigating whether he was throwing rocks. Even if he was, the question is, was this the right response to that? Obviously, we don't think so. Do you agree with the U.S. State Department? Was there any excuse at all to beat this small teenager while he was handcuffed?
That's exactly correct. There is no excuse for this sort of behavior, and we're currently investigating. And it's not the police investigating themselves. We've initiated an impartial, objective, independent inquiry into exactly what happened. That inquiry is being done by our Justice Ministry. Once again, it's not the police doing an internal investigation. It's an outside investigation. The victim and his family have already given evidence. The investigation is ongoing. Look, it doesn't matter if he was involved in the violence or not. The fact is that he was handcuffed and apparently he was beaten. And if those allegations are proven true, the Israeli police involved will have to pay a price. That's clear.
Mark, Palestinians say this happens all the time. The only difference is that this kid was American.
I beg to disagree. We are in Israel. We're a democracy like the United States. The police have to work in the framework of the law. They're not above the law. That's what happens in our neighbor countries, where the police are above the law. In Israel, we have, of course, checks and balances. We have rule by the rule of law, and the police have to work in the framework of the law. And this unit inside our Ministry of Justice routinely deals with complaints against the police. Once again, we don't think complaints against the police should be investigated in-house by the police themselves. We believe they should be done independently, and that's why we've got this special unit in our Ministry of Justice to actually look into these complaints.
As you know, there are a lot of human rights groups that just disagree with your assessment, and in fact, there is a group that looked at all the incidences of violence against Palestinians by Jewish settlers and said that it's under 10% that there is even any sort of indictment. Most of the cases are just dismissed when there is violence against Palestinians by settlers in the territories.
Look, Israel is a country where we've got a very independent, I would say fiercely independent judiciary. And anyone who has a complaint against the way the Israeli army, the Israeli police, Israeli citizens have behaved, you have open to you a whole series of legal procedures that people use. And I can tell you, I know the system works. How do I know that? Because Palestinians regularly go to the Israeli courts, and when they're right, when their complaint is justified, they can win.
Mark, let's talk now about the murder of Tarek's cousin, Mohammed Abu Kader. I want to read from today's editorial from Haaretz newspaper. Abu Kader's murderers are not Jewish extremists. They are the descendants and builders of a culture of hate and vengeance that is nurtured and fertilized by the guides of the Jewish state, those for whom every Arab is a bitter enemy simply because they are Arab. Prosecuting the murderers is no longer sufficient. There must be a cultural revolution in Israel. How about that charge? There are a lot of Israelis, especially on the left, who think this didn't happen in a vacuum. This is part of the culture in Israel, hostility towards Arabs nurtured by Israeli politicians.
Look, I don't think that's true. The Israeli civil society, the government, wall to wall, everyone has condemned, totally condemned that murder. And my Prime Minister earlier today rang up the father of the victim of that murder and spoke to him, and first of all expressed his condolences and the condolences of the people of Israel. But more than that, he wanted to condemn in unequivocal terms that vigilante violence, that murder, that hate crime, and he wanted to say that, you know, Israel stands thoroughly against this. We promised to investigate, we promised to bring the perpetrators of that crime to justice, and guess what? We delivered. We've done exactly that. And it's important to say that these despicable murderers, the people who've conducted this crime, they are for us people who we despise, people who have no place in our society.
Mark, I'm old enough to remember when there would be a crime against an Israeli and the rally in Israel would be peaceful. Now we see these rallies and the crowd start chanting death to Arabs, death to Arabs.
I want to be clear. I'm sure you saw the funeral of the 3 Israeli teens who were brutally murdered by Hamas. There was tens of thousands of Israelis there, and the atmosphere was not one of violence, not one of aggression, not one even asking for retribution or for revenge. It was very, I would argue, there was this silence, there was this unity, there was this quiet mourning, there was a sense of national solidarity. The extremists, those making the noise, those who talk about violence and instigating sort of hatred against the other sides, they are a small minority. That doesn't mean we tolerate them. My Prime Minister said clearly, we will not tolerate incitement, we will not tolerate hate crimes, we will not tolerate racism in Israel, and the state, the country, will come down with all the power of the law against individuals involved in those sort of activities.
Mark Regev, thank you for your time. We are all praying for peace in your part of the world.